Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kansas Reflector's Weekly Roundup. My name is Clay Wirestone. I'm the Reflector's opinion editor.
I'm Sherman Smith. I'm the editor-in-chief.
And we are here today to recap this past week in Kansas news and look ahead to this week. We are right in the heat of the primary campaign season, and candidates across the state are just going out and making their cases to their fans, and trying to make new ones.
That's right. You know, the two leading Democratic candidates for governor, a couple of state senators from Johnson County. I say leading just because they've been on the campaign trail for a year. Both announced this week that they support recreational marijuana, not just medical marijuana, but recreational marijuana.
That's right, and this is something that I think State Senator Cindy Holscher had kind of hoped to get kind of a jump on, right?
Yeah, she planned to make an announcement at 4:20 one day this week, and Ethan Corson found out she was going to do that, and so preempted her by just a few minutes. Both wanted to say that they were Cindy Holscher wanted to say she was the first and only candidate to fully embrace recreational marijuana. Ethan Corson preempted that so he could say, I said it first. Regardless, I think it's significant that we have two candidates for a party who are embracing recreational marijuana. I think for the first time that we've had a major candidate for a party in Kansas do that.
Well, and this is one of the ways in which, incumbency can kind of lock political campaigns and the political landscape, for in space just for a while. Governor Laura Kelly has been governor for 8 years, and the conversation around medical and recreational marijuana has just changed a great deal, not just in Kansas, but obviously throughout the entire United States since 2018.
Yeah, Cindy Holscher is a state senator. She's appeared on our podcast before to talk about the need to legalize marijuana. She's been a long-time advocate for this, but the conversation has always been around medical because it's seen as the first step in doing this. There's another Democrat in the race, of course, Kurt Skoog, the Overland Park mayor, who joined on the filing deadline and entered the race. His focus, he says, he's more on the regulations for how we do this. He says, those two are doing the political thing and saying this. He wants to start with medical marijuana. He says the real conversation needs to be how we regulate this. He wants to regulate it like we do alcohol, make sure the product is safe, that people stay safe. I think Holscher and Corson are focused more on the how do we make a lot of money off of this and how do we stop people from going to Missouri to get it. Cindy Holscher released a video with her announcement filmed in the parking lot of a dispensary in Missouri, just across the state line. She said it was 15 minutes from her home in Overland Park. And she said the parking lot is full of license plates that are from Kansas. So their focus has been more on the financial aspect of this. Kurt Skoog pointed to his running mate, Jennifer McKinney, a physician from Fredonia, and said, I have just the right person to figure out how we can best, regulate this, get the rules in place to really open the door to marijuana, and maybe someday down the road we can think about recreation.
Well, and we've been talking about the Democrats here, but also the Republican candidates for governor had a debate this past week. Well, we should say some Republican
Right.
candidates for governor had a debate last week. They had a televised debate, and the three who showed up were Charlotte O'Hara, businessman Philip Sarnecki, and Secretary of State Scott Schwab. During their debate, they were notably cold to the idea of any sort of, legalized status for marijuana, although they also really were talking in terms of, well, there are many more potent varieties out there. We don't want, young people to be impacted by this. Concern about the health effects. I think it's interesting that they're talking about that in that way because, of course, just any sort of marijuana is still very much illegal in Kansas, and depending on where you live, you can certainly face some real criminal penalties for that.
Right. This is not a surprise. The Republicans at past debates, even when more of them bothered to show up, opposed marijuana legalizing it for any reason. There is one notable outlier, of course. That's Nick Reinecker. He filed for the governor's race as a Republican at the filing deadline, one of the last to enter the race. and he's a longtime advocate for marijuana. He wasn't on stage. The Republican Party limited it, I think, to the people who met certain criteria. Vicky Schmidt, of course, refuses to sign whatever agreement or give them the $10,000 bounty
$10,000
to be part of these debates.
To be part of the debates. Yeah, and of course, the notable person who didn't show up this past week to that televised debate was Senate President Ty Masterson.
Yeah, mostly seen, I think, as the front runner because he has the endorsement of President Donald Trump. He has a lot of endorsements from significant political groups in Kansas. Why do you think he didn't show up, Clay?
Well, it's an interesting, you should ask that, Sherman. A day or two before that debate, the Kansas City Star published a news story by reporter Matthew Kelly about a situation that a lot of us have known about involving Masterson and his work, something that I've actually mentioned in my columns going back to 2023. But Matthew Kelly really did kind of an in-depth reported piece about this, and it's about Masterson's role as director of Go Create, a Koch collaborative, which is a department, it's a maker space kind of located at Wichita State University. And it's a place where people can go and, design and create various, essentially whatever they can imagine in kind of this, a kind of a controlled setting, shall we say. Masterson, who does not have a college diploma, gets paid, at least as of last year, $160,000 a year for this job at WSU. And Sarnecki and kind of other people who've been critical of Masterson and his campaign have started to highlight that job and say, Sarnecki, I believe, called it a no-show job.
Right.
And so, yeah.
The State Senator Patrick Schmidt, he's a Democrat from Topeka. He made an issue of this during budget negotiations, during a budget debate on the Senate floor this year, where he said, this is, I believe these were Patrick Schmidt's words, that this was corruption in plain sight. He's getting paid by Koch to do a job that nobody seems to understand what this job actually entails. Now, he was shouted down kind of on the Senate floor, told that he was like a political nobody, voted down 37-1 to strip funding for this out of the budget. Or I think that the ploy was to say you have to actually show up in order to get this salary. That's a key component here because Matthew Kelly reported Masterson doesn't show up very often in the office. It sounds like he went down, I think he showed a photo of Masterson. People didn't recognize him. Somebody else who's there identified herself as the director of Go Create. But the Masterson campaign had some things to say about this.
Well, I mean, and as I do give, I give politicians of all parties and ideologies a lot of credit when they actually talk to reporters.
Yes.
And they engage with the news media, and Masterson and his campaign did engage with Kelly. Masterson said that he worked on sourcing equipment. He worked on fundraising efforts. He, kind of helped manage the space. And, he said because he felt like it was an administrative role, he didn't have to be there in person all the time. His campaign said that it was something that was, he was proudest of in his career. So, they do want to talk about it to an extent, at least in the sense that questions have been raised and they're trying to answer them. But, to me, from kind of my skeptical opinion editor lens, they're still not really answering the questions or the concerns that have kind of been raised here. Exactly like how often does the Senate president show up to do work? What does he precisely do? And how does he, and $160,000 a year, even though that's not even though he's taking a leave when he's at, doing his job as Senate president, for which he gets paid $85,000 a year. It's quite a bit of money. And I think a lot of us would really enjoy having a $160,000 a year job that, had relatively few guidelines.
If only we could all decide which bills get across the finish line on the Senate floor.
Indeed.
But getting back to the debates, Ty Masterson didn't show up. This is not necessarily uncommon if you view yourself as a clear front runner. Sometimes you don't show up to debates because you don't want to give anybody a reason to detract from you. You don't want to say the wrong thing. It's viewed as a risk. Who knows if that's the case, but he didn't show up to the debate. I thought it was interesting during the opportunity to give a final comment here, final statement, where you get to make your one last pitch to voters. The three candidates on the stage, it was Philip Sarnacki said, everybody should be outraged that Ty Masterson isn't here. Charlotte O'Hara was like, people should be outraged that this is the baby killing capital of the world and voting, elections are skeptical, whatever. And then Scott Schwab, who's the Secretary of State, was just like, listen to my very important policies that'll make the state better. Why won't anybody listen to this?
Well, and I think it's important to note that, people that really have fleshed out and possibly sensible, or at least thought through policy proposals. I think those of us in the media always enjoy that sort of thing because you can report on actual proposals and you can talk about what people are doing. I remember being back in New Hampshire in 2016 when former Florida Governor Jeb Bush was running for president.
Jeb.
And yes, and and he had a very, he essentially was saying, well, I want to make government like Google, and he had all of this kind of in-depth white paper proposals for how to run things. But he's not our president.
That's right. Scott Schwab has a fun name for his policy agenda. It's called BALD. It's an abbreviation of, I forget what the BALD stands for, but he, of course, is bald, has made his campaign, some of his ads are about this. It's a cutesy thing to presumably to get attention for his policies, but I don't know if people are paying attention or not.
Scott! Anyway, but moving on to things that don't have to do with politics, at least not state governor politics, Kansas governor politics. You headed down to Salina a little bit ago and wrote a story that appeared this last week about happenings in Salina.
I have a few stories in the pipelines out of that trip, but the story that we published is about a lawsuit that a investigator for the Public Defender's Office has filed against former deputy prosecutor and 3 police officers. He's accusing them of fabricating a perjury charge against him last year. So his name is Micah Bunce. He used to be a Salina police officer. He'd been a sheriff out in western Kansas before that. Left the police force, effectively switched teams. He's working for the Public Defender's Office now. He had testified in a case where a woman was caught with a meth pipe. She claimed it was bath salts. He took the stand and said, back when I was a police officer, we had tests that could tell you if this was bath salts. It would test for bath salts. We would know. It turned out to be largely immaterial, he argues, because after that preliminary hearing where he testified, the woman ended up pleading guilty anyway, admitted that it was meth all along. But police were unhappy about this. It's not clear from the public record why they were so bothered by his testimony. But there's an exchange of emails between the police officers and this deputy prosecutor where the prosecutor says, we could complain about him to his boss and maybe they would fire him, but if we actually file a charge against him, they would absolutely fire him. So you guys need to produce an affidavit so we can charge him. And what police came up with was this idea that because they didn't have tests that were specifically for bath salts, they have tests that can be used for bath salts and other things, but not specifically for bath salts. They argued that he committed perjury when he testified. That became the basis for a charge that was filed against him. And that case eventually was dropped when it became clear that police were being misleading in their court testimony. That's why he's suing them.
Well, and I mean, it's really, at least according to the folks who you talked to for this story, really this is not something that happens.
No, it's rare.
This is a very unusual event.
Rare that somebody gets charged with perjury. I talked to Kelson Bonnet. He was a former public defender for the state. He now does defense work at a federal level. But he said, rarely ever do these cases get charged. And he pointed out, most cases that public defenders handle, police are on the stand and will say something that is contradictory to the evidence, to other witnesses, to something police have said before, or documentation. They would never charge a police officer with perjury for saying something that can be disputed on the stand. This seemed very strange. He said if the facts is that they're outlined in the complaint, the lawsuit that Micah Bunce has filed, if those facts are true, Kelson Bonnet said, then it does look like this was a malicious prosecution.
Well, and this is a story that you're going to keep track of here as this case goes forward.
We'll see what happens.
And so then, looking to the week ahead, our reporter Anna Kaminsky has her own kind of in-depth story that's coming up, right?
This is something she's been working on here for 3 or 4 months now, following the situation where hospital in Topeka, Stormont Vale, has been garnishing people's wages for medical debt. There are a lot of details to this that I think are very interesting. It's an in-depth story people will want to read at our website, kansasreflector.com. Our summer intern, Bea Burgess, a recent University of Kansas grad, she's doing several stories about these State Board of Education races. All 5 of the seats that are up for election this year are open seats. The 5 Republican incumbents decided not to seek re-election. So we'll have at least the first one of those stories out this week. And then Tuesday night, the 2 of us are going to Hiawatha. This is a free public event, an educational event. The 2 of us will be part of a panel discussion with Kevin Hill, he's a local attorney up there, and Natalie Haig, who's joined me on similar conversations before. She's a former chief counsel to Governor Bill Graves, was on the Supreme Court Nominating Commission for 8 years. The subject of this that we're talking about is, of course, the constitutional amendment that is on the August 4th ballot about whether we should elect Supreme Court justices. And so if you want information about that, if you haven't made up your mind, this is a good opportunity to come see Clay in all of his glory.
And Sherman and all of his.
As we provide this information.
The other thing that's very important coming up this week is it is the deadline to register to vote in the primary election and the beginning of early voting in the primary election.
That's right. Tuesday is the last day to register to vote. Early voting starts Wednesday. This is handled a little differently from one county to the next, but they have the opportunity to start on Wednesday. You can go request a ballot. You may be able to go down to, depending on when they have office hours, to your election office. That's the county attorney's office in 101 counties. 4 largest one, there's a designated election office. You can go fill out a ballot there, or you can get your mail-in ballot sent to your home and then either drop that in the mail or put it in a drop box.
You know, it's democracy. So, or a democratic republic, as some people insist upon saying. Anyway, so you can follow along with this and ever more stories and commentary pieces through our daily newsletter. You can subscribe to that newsletter at kansasreflector.com/subscribe. That's kansasreflector.com/subscribe.
How much does that subscription cost, Clay?
It is a big fat goose egg, Sherman. It is $0. It costs nothing. And yet benefits you so much about Kansas.
We do this as a public service. All of our reporters, all of our staff, even Clay does this as a public service.
Well, I mean, we do get paid. I should emphasize, but it is available for free to you.
Our newsletter is free. The stories are all free to read. There's no advertising. We want you to be informed.
And so with that, thank you so much for watching. My name's Clay Wirestone.
I'm Sherman Smith.
And we'll see you next time.